Now, you didn't, you left Harvard and then came back.
Yeah. Well, the war started in December of '41, and I left, I guess, late '42, and I went off to.
You enlisted.
I enlisted, yeah.
And you chose the Army?
I went to the Air Corps.
The Army Air Corps?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because you see, it makes more sense being in an airplane than being down on the ground. And also, well, you really want to impart, at that time, they weren't taking blacks as aviation cadets. And finally, they set up Tuskegee, and they took only 25 a month. And I figured that, gee, by the time they got around to me, I'd finish. But it happened, and Bill Hasty was civilian aide to the War Department, and Mr. Stimson, and he protested and raised hell about this. So he quit. So they called all of us up and sent us down to first Biloxi, Mississippi, and then to Tuskegee to train, and then to start flight training, maybe about 4 months later.
So you were a Tuskegee Airman.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is that's a pretty select group of folks.
Yeah, they were good people. I'll tell you that story. This is show you for life when you say you never, segregation. But then getting back to the story, so when I was called up to active duty, it was to Biloxi Field, Mississippi. I knew that once you got to Washington, you had to ride segregated. Well, I had enough law at the Harvard Law School and human dignity, and, we read Rousseau and everything, that didn't appeal to me. So I went in to see the sergeant and said, look, Fred, the moment they make me go segregated, you're going to get a telephone call from me. And I say, you got a boy someplace down here outside of Washington, you better come get him. So I said, now you can avoid this, because by this time I knew that Charlie Houston had won the case in the Supreme Court, saying that because they had no black Pullman cars, that if you bought a Pullman ticket, they had to take you integrated. So I told so that's what they did. So I rode from Washington to I rode from Boston to Biloxi first class. So I wasn't second. But when I get off the train and I'm walking down the street, this white sergeant says to me, "Hey nigger, where you going?" Well, I keep on walking. Now the rest of it I feel kind of embarrassed, because he then said, "Hey boy." And I must have confessed I settled for boy. I turned around, told him where I was going, and he said, "Oh, I'm supposed to take you to the air base." And he put me in the back of his truck, and then he picked up about 3 or 4 other white guys who had been in town for the weekend. And one white guy said to another guy, said, "Gee, why do I see all these well-dressed niggers in town? What are they doing here?" And the guy said, that Mrs. Roosevelt, she taught that dumb president that those black people could fly, so they could get training. So that's how I went over to the air base. That was my introduction into the U.S. Army.
Quite a change from Harvard.
A little different from Harvard, yeah.
And once you got into the training and whatever, I mean, do you look back on that as a positive experience, the Tuskegee and the interaction with your fellow?
Because at first, you couldn't have lived in the country the way I did without feeling that maybe that there were black people that weren't as smart as other people. But there you had the cream of the crop. I mean, guys came in, and they could outplay me at poker, they could outplay me a lot of things, and they were awfully good people. And so you really get an education, and some of them, remain friends for the rest of my life. So really, it was a real experience, and these people were all good. Now I only flew through basic, and after that I figured that I better do something else, and so they sent me to the Harvard Business School, and I became a statistician. But then I did a lot of court-martial work. In fact, that one of the great cases was we were just about finished winning in Europe, and they were bringing people back to retrain them to go to the Pacific. So they brought back the 332nd Fighter Group, combined it with a bomber group, to the 477 bomber group, and we were stationed at a place called Freeman Field, Indiana. And on that base, they had two officers' clubs. One was the beautiful officers' club. The other one was just a converted shack. They said that if you were a trainee, you couldn't go into the officers' club. You could only go in the other place. If you were an instructor, you could go into the officers' club. Well, it turned out that the instructors were these white second-year lieutenants who had trained in the later airplanes because they had never gone overseas, whereas the 332nd Fighter Group, these guys, some had 40 and 50 missions, but because they were now learning how to fly a different airplane, they were trainees. So we had first discussions, and we said that somehow we ought to be able to go into another officers' club. They shouldn't keep us out. So we had discussed. So finally, one night, they decided they were to go in. They said, well, Coleman, don't you go in, because you're the only guy knowing any law. You stay out. Don't you? And 104 officers went in. The last advice I gave them, well, I don't know how to get you out, but I don't think that President Roosevelt would let 104 black officers stay in jail. They went in. Well, you know what happened that night? That was the night that Roosevelt died. So the next day when I went to see my clients, they said, gee, you can't even depend upon a white guy dying at the right time. But anyway, they then brought B.O. Davis back, and we had this big trial. And we were able to get them all acquitted. Ted Burry, Ted Burry, well, Thurgood Marshall sent him down to help me because I only had a year and a half of law school then. And we got him acquitted. We got him acquitted on the grounds. There's an Army regulation called 210-19, which says that any officers' club on any base is open to every officer. Now, this bears the date of 1919. So obviously it had nothing to do with civil rights. And what happened was after the First World War, the West Pointers didn't want the National Guard people to go into the Good Officers Club, so they had two sets. So obviously the National Guard had enough political power to get that change. So I, with a straight face, stood up, and that's how we won the case. So that's and therefore about 3 months later, Truman issued an order desegregating all the recreational facilities.
And so you were able to pull that off with a year and a half of law school?
Yeah, well, you have to read. Yeah. No, I read the regulations, and Ted Burry was a good lawyer. He was a good trial lawyer. The two of us, we were able to pull it off. You don't just say pull the headlines, you say the afro. You ever see these headlines? Yeah. This was big stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But then the war ended, so then and fortunately, B.O. Davis, who was my commanding officer by then, told me to make up the list of people to get out to where it needed. And I put myself at the top of the list, so that's how I got back to law school by January 45, yeah.